Talks with Sfath. Extract from Talks with Sfath of Sunday, May 5, 1946. Sfath, you have become 9 years old in February and have learned very much through my instructions over the past 2 years and are now very knowing in many concerns. However, what I have to explain to you today corresponds to a further continuation of your decision and all those explanations and facts that I had already mentioned to you on the 2nd of June, 1944, during our first major decision-making and explication talk, which until today was followed by additional informatory talks. Last year then, it was on the 3rd of February, 1945, I gave you an understanding of my first initiation and introductory talk and let you, in a clear wise, into the task of your mission. There. Edward Sfath, may I interrupt you? Sfath, of course, if you have a question. Edward, yes, it is so, because I do not understand why you say that we had conducted twice an initial talk, namely one on the 2nd of June, 1944, then an initial talk on the 3rd of February, 1945. The really first talk, however, was there. Sfath, your question is justified, but to explain is the fact that in my view the first talk in June of 1944 was an informational, explanatory and decision-making talk and therefore is to be understood in this wise as the first talk. The second and therefore first talk of February 3, 1945, however, was a fact-related introductory, initiatory, and clarifying talk regarding your task and mission as well as many circumstances, etc. My naming of these two talks may seem confusing to you, but they are really to be observed and considered, assessed and understood in this way as to different initial talks. Edward, yes, it is somewhat confusing, but I can understand it. Sfath, as already in recent years, also today I have to make you familiar with many facts, which you will certainly understand as well as consciously accept and work out, which however, will only be possible for you, because due to my action into your consciousness development, you are already many times further developed in your rationality and in your intellect, than normally can be the case with an earth boy of your age and even with a man of earth 4 times older. Well, also regarding the first and other talks with you concerning the explanation of your task and mission, there is still something to say, namely that I will bring up the same facts several times and at different times, which is based therein, that through this method of repeating, you will again and again recall with interest the details of all of what you have learned and continue to learn of my explanations and everything that is of great importance for yourself and your task and mission. This also includes cognizances, which will in fact interest you only in later decades. Nevertheless, I want to point out to you already today, that you will have to intensively occupy yourself with it as early as the next decade and particularly from the 1970s at the latest, when you begin to build up your work and mission. It will then be that you have to thoroughly inform yourself and also learn new things there too, namely concerning the financial system, to which I will now introductorily explain the following to you: the future of the terrestrial banking, companies and corporations as well as politics, governments and the economy will be very profitable in the coming decades, after which, however, an extensive mismanagement will appear in all areas and will from the 1980s until well into the new millennium let many things collapse. Especially in Europe, and therefore also in Switzerland, as well as in the USA and Canada, banks, companies and corporations will fall into great difficulties and must make use of state aid for their continued existence, although for some their mismanagement will lead to bankruptcy. However, even in the populations of many of these countries, and indeed also particularly throughout Europe, the USA and Canada, financial indebtedness will likewise develop on a private basis such that they can no longer meet their financial obligations, just as this will also be the case with regard to the national budgets of many countries which can no longer be master of their debts. The whole leads to heavy economic breakdowns and to the dissolution and bankruptcy of long-established and decades-long rightfully managed banks, companies and corporations, as well as many years of state financial problems and continual governmental changes as a result of authorities incapable of governing. And again, to refer to the private sector, thus arises, as has been said, great financial indebtedness, because in the population's a senseless and uncontrollable squandering of money for a lot of unnecessary things runs widely rampant and will even bring about family quarrels and destructions of families and heavy criminal and felonious deeds and acts. As a result of the incipient and rapidly developing economic boom, the compensation of employees will rise rapidly and will also drive the general standard of living into higher forms, which along with this will entice the human beings to treat themselves to ever greater financial expenditures and to incur debts that they cannot afford with respect to their wage income. For you, your family, the work and mission group and their individual members, as well as for a center, which you will build up according to your imaginations with the help of your like-minded companions gathering around you at a place known to you, on a nearby elevated site in the vicinity of the birthplace of your mother. Will you then in addition endeavor to acquaint yourself with a large financial budget? And regarding this, you will assume in a voluntary wise the responsibility and management for the community that you will form as a society, and you will also counsel givingly and helpfully stand by its members. However, the future of the financial economy will be difficult, because starting from the year 1988, it will become quite dark all over the world with regard to money, because then the foundation of a capital power takes place in the USA, which will intervene as a worldwide effective shadow bank and world shadow government in the entire global financial world and dominate many countries and their structures. In the USA itself, this capital might will expand to a state internal shadow government, which, in a secret wise for the population of the USA, will govern the United States of America in accordance with its will, as is also done by another American shadow government that has already been existing for a long time and will survive even until far into the future. The new capital might, which will be founded in 1988, as I have already explained, is to set up a global capital network, and indeed in a short space of time, through which then not only are the world's financial community of banks extensively ruled in accordance with this world shadow government's own might structures, but also the politics, various political systems and the economies of many countries. With regard to these things, you have to learn a lot, thus also make use of many facts that I have already mentioned to you and also will continue to mention, in order to compose fact-showing and warning writings concerning the coming dangerously unpeaceful world happenings. You shall, however, also name the threatening, terribleness-bringing machinations of the overpopulation, that destroy the nature, the water and the climate, get very badly out of the control of a good form and undermine everything that is natural, and this will lead to very heavy and primeval world-like natural disasters, if a stop will not be put to all the future threatening and osgietet machinations of the very rapidly ever further growing overpopulation. Thereto, the beginning is already set with a by far excessive overpopulation featuring approximately 2.8 billion human beings, through which since the last and especially in this century, through the actions of the world wars in connection with the advance of technology and the misuse of nuclear energy as well as the criminal application of gases and poisons, etc. many climate and nature-destroying machinations are already bringing forth heavy consequences. So the bad outcoming effects with regard to the climate destruction arising through the guilt of the earthly humankind will show effect as early as the next month of December. And the fact that these effects, coming and continuing long into the future, will be real consequences of the overpopulation, will be denied by the scientists and all the responsible ones until well into the third millennium. While it will be, that over time it will be recognized, that all sorts of irresponsible machinations of the humankind will bring about the climate change, nevertheless there will be no talk of the fact, that the nature, planet, and climate-destroying machinations will come about in its magnitude only due to that which far exceeds the earth-tolerable measure of the unstoppable growing overpopulation. The main causes of the climate change, which will actually be a climate destruction, are based in various manipulative forms triggered by the mass of humanity, through which the entire earthly ecosystem, the climate, the atmosphere and nature and the whole planet up to its very foundations will be destructively included. Everything will be triggered by an irresponsible exploitation of Earth's resources, poisoning and pollution of the atmosphere, nature, fauna and flora, the oceans and inland waters, by various toxic gases, emissions from internal combustion engines and heaters that are operated with fossil fuels. Also artificial fertilizers and all kinds of herbicides, pesticides and many other substances have a destructive effect on the whole of nature, fauna and flora and also cause many serious illnesses in the human beings. And adversely affected by poisonous gases, the ozone layer itself will also be diminishing dangerously, which leads to skin cancers in the human being and other ailments and will also bring about many changes in the fauna and flora. All the seas and inland waters will also be loaded and contaminated with toxic substances and all sorts of rubbish. In particular, in all waters of the world many kinds of plastics will bring a miserable dying and death to countless water-dwelling life forms, which will also take place in the fields, meadows and forests and with regard to many land-based creatures. The plastic, and this I just want to explain, was invented as far back as 1531 in what was then Germany, from the processing of cheese as a synthetic horn or casein. However, also in the coming decades new forms and products will again be invented, which lead to a terrible environmental disaster over the course of a few decades, because the human beings will heedlessly and irresponsibly discard tons of plastics in the free nature. And all the causes and outcoming effects will lead to environmental disasters, which the entire earthly humanity will master only with great difficulty or even not at all, because in relation to the growing overpopulation, entirely everything connected to environmental pollution, destruction of the environment, the planet, nature, climate, atmosphere and fauna and flora becomes increasingly more extensive, more dangerous, more life-eliminating and more destructive. And the beginning for this was laid by the already existing overpopulation and its associated machinations, to which in the worst form will belong the coming worldwide climate change with its globally destructive consequences. For this, primarily the USA will be the very basis for it and comprehensively bears the guilt, and indeed through its criminally irresponsible first atomic test and the 2 atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. These 3 irresponsible felonious acts committed to the planet, the nature, the climate, the fauna and flora and to the humankind, will now lead, from the coming month of December, to the first drastic outcoming effects to appear with serious consequences concerning a fast and unstoppably developing and all-encompassing very adverse climate change. So in 8 months' time, unalterably, a then henceforth ever-escalating climate change is going to announce itself, out of whichever worsening natural disasters develop over the next 50 years. Which will bring forth much unexpected human hardship and the misery as well as destruction all over the earth. But what now will occur extensively on the planet, the entire earthly humankind, the nature, fauna and flora, the atmosphere and on the climate due to the American felonious acts, now takes its full destructive course, hence the first heavy climatic changes are about to happen, which gather themselves as of December next month. Thus it happens that in the coming month of December, all of Central Europe is beset by an unusual cold spell down to -30 degrees, which also grips England and leads to a large number of human beings freezing to death and will end only next year in the middle of March, so in 1947. Yet the coming extreme weather conditions will be even more far-reaching and will continue until 1948. And will bring a great deal of hardship, suffering and misery in other countries as well, and indeed even in the time to come well into the 3rd millennium. And this will also be the case with the upcoming cold winter, which will be referred to as hunger winter after the next year, and which will also stand in connection with the food crisis already commencing at the beginning of this year, which requires the death of hundreds of thousands of human beings in Europe, spreading also to the Soviet Union, and will bring death to more than 2.4 million human beings there, as also in other countries. However, when next year the cold wave finds its end in the month of March, then oppositely a great heat wave begins, and with that a very hot summer, which will, in the whole of Europe, last until the end of September, bringing not a drop of rain, and will be recorded in history as steppe summer of 1947. Depending on the location and region, temperatures will be between 39.5 degrees Celsius in the shade and 47 degrees Celsius in the sun, and certain fruit trees will bloom twice and yield small fruits. Meadows, vegetable gardens and grasslands will also dry up, as well as smaller lakes and creeks, as well as large lakes and rivers will fall to a very low water level. And because the rainwater will be lacking everywhere, a lot of cattle must then be slaughtered all over Europe, because as a result of a rainfall shortage, food for the animals will no longer grow. Water is then also lacking in nature, in which animals die of thirst, and so 2 years after the last World War, a great deal of hardship will prevail, and in some regions the human being will suffer hunger, which will even get worse due to the extreme heat. And because in many places there will be no rain as well as no water at all, poor crop expectations will develop, because the days will be hot and sunny and let no plants grow, and since no rain will fall, the farmers will also be unable to plant the next crop. Consequently, there will be no harvests, and then a shortage of certain foodstuffs will develop. However, the whole of the cold wave and heat wave will be downplayed by meteorologists, climatologists, by certain other scientists, and by the population, and of course attributed to natural weather changes. It will be asserted for a long time, and until well into the third millennium, that it concerns naturally changing weather processes that would come along from time to time. Consequently, during the next 5 decades neither scientists nor the humankind itself will give thought to the real causes. They will all contradict the facts that everything will be connected due to the ozartungen and irresponsible machinations by all the destructive excesses of the overpopulation in nature, on the climate and on the atmosphere, and will escalate ever more and begin to spread without hope of rescue. The coming decades to well into the third millennium will bring many new uprisings, civil wars, wars and revolutions all around the world, as well as malicious and conscienceless dictators will continue committing their murderous activities over their peoples, whereto in many cases the USA, as is tradition, will do everything to overthrow foreign governments for the sake of its own benefit. In the foreseeable future, a worldwide and religiously conditioned sect-related and otherwise inhuman criminal terrorism will also emerge, for which also the USA with its politics, and from 1756 onwards, practically all former Rus state powerful ones live in the delusion since then, to have to seize world domination with secret services, military and warlike operations into the concerns of foreign states, and to plunder the conquered states with regard to their resources and treasures. And with very few exceptions, which you can count on half a hand, the future US power holders will do the same, because the American world domination delusion will unrestrainedly continue to exist and also bring unendingly much suffering and misery, torture, deaths and destruction all over the world in the future. However, all those elements who presently are in power and as followers, act in the same ways and are of equal senses, and thus are also of the same sense, as well as all similar ones will take action of the same kind, who will be in the time to come. And these will be the mightful ones of the state themselves, as well as their advisers and followers, commanders and those who execute commands of the secret services, and the military, etc. But all over the world there will also ensue felonious organizations of many kinds, as well as extremist radical racist as also religious sectarian organizations, from which also proceed many religious and delusion obsessions related to sects of death, which will demand hundreds of thousands of murder victims, particularly in the USA, South America, Switzerland, Japan and Canada, as well as in Arabia, Africa, Asia, France, and some other countries in Europe in the wake of religious lunacy and as a result of might delusion. You will have to view and consider all these facts just as thoroughly as well as everything I have explained, said and taught to you in the last few years, because as of the next decade you will have to compose the corresponding writings, which you shall send to all governments and to many public media, to point out to them what will happen, if extensive rationality is not finally practiced by the humankind of Earth. If it does not happen, your words are not heeded and bear no fruit, then the Earth and its humankind will be facing a very evil and terrible future. And so that you can also fulfill your task regarding this all the same, I will continue to instruct you in the fine art of writing, as I have already done so since your 4th year of age without your conscious knowledge by means of impulse guidances, as a result of which you have already learned to write without your parents knowing, before you were integrated into school. And as I have also done this since 1944 with your consent and knowledge, I will continue to do so henceforth. But in spite of your extensive knowledge acquired up to now, you furthermore must still learn a great deal until 1953 and direct your interests to a great many things, which you must know and understand. So you fundamentally and extraordinarily for your age have to be interested in a great many things, namely that from now on in your life, as also in the world, there will take place much more in all sorts of respects than what I have presented to you thus far in all the different explanations and predictions. Actually, you must be interested in everything, especially because you have to learn to be concerned with everything through your thoughts and feelings and to thereafter prepare yourself to strengthen your psyche and to accept everything in every respect. To know coming events in advance, as I have already made you understand in other explanations, means in any case, and whatever it may be, a very heavy burden, stressing the consciousness and the psyche, and indeed especially when it concerns occurrences which are, on the one hand, connected to you personally or otherwise directed against your personal attitude, honor, morality, behavior and dignity with regard to the value of life, the well-being of human beings, all forms of life and nature. And since everything abnormal is repugnant to you according to your attitude, your character, your morality and the modes of your thoughts, feelings, and your forms of your behavior which is directed according to the laws and recommendations of the creation, it is necessary that I continue to teach you as up until now, just as you through your thoughts and feelings, care for and preserve the healthy state of your consciousness and your psyche. In doing so, however, you must in this regard use your own intellect and your own rationality, in order to tread the way, hereof personally given to you, and to achieve your destination's aim. This is of great necessity, because without this absolutely essential learning, in order to care for your thoughts and feelings in a right and positive wise, so that your psyche remains equalized and healthy, you would not be able to accept many explanations and predictions, because they would burden you thus terribly, that you would perish by them when they arrive in the future and truthfully take place. Through learning, however, you will become powerful in your thoughts and feelings, learn to master them and also be able to control your consciousness and psyche state, and indeed even if you are struck by great affliction, pain and deep sorrow, which you in your life will come across very often and thus will not spare you. So it is of pre-given necessity that you concern yourself with it already now and also in the future, and that you also prepare yourself for the future, and indeed especially therefore to form and control your thoughts and feelings such that you will never fall into difficulties with your consciousness and your psyche. Therefore I will also instruct and teach you in a strict wise according to our psychology, which is superior to the earthly knowledge, which will be of very great importance for you, in order to always behave rightly in a psychological wise regarding yourself. However, it will also have to be that you are able to rightly recognize and assess the psychological impulsations of the human beings, through which you can protect yourself from harm on the one hand, but on the other are also able to provide life, and behavioral, as well as and psychological recovery assistance, if the need for it exists. So, through this teaching and instruction, you will attain much more knowledge than any earthly study of psychology could offer you. But now, with regard to everything that will be related to you yourself and will also happen in the world, which I have already predictively explanatorily told you in other talks and also will continue to do so. You must bring your thoughts, feelings, your consciousness and your psyche under control in such a way that you can also accept and get through very bad things without harm, because your life itself will demand that from you, as well as your task and mission will do so. And in your life it will often be the case and necessary, that you have a strong consciousness, strong controlled thoughts and feelings and a strong, healthy psyche. It will come to pass a great deal, because you will be living an adventurous and not undangerous life far from your home, before returning home after many years, settling down and beginning your work and mission, which however will not be easy. Rather it will be with much work and malicious attacks against your life and with repulsiveness against you and your mission efforts. Outwardly, however, and this I must once again say and demand of you, you must keep everything confidential towards all human beings, because it would be dangerous to speak openly about what I have taught you and continue to teach you as explanations and predictions, because a foreknowledge of the facts would call forth anxiety and horror among the human beings. So you can speak openly about everything that does not concern such facts that must be kept silent, which show things about which I have had to impose silence on you, and also must do so with regard to additional information that I will make known to you over the next 7 years. Even in the case of might-obsessed rulers of any importance, racist organizations, religionists of all shades, priests, pastors and theologians, sects and scientists as well as criminals, felons and adversaries of all kinds, actions and deeds could be suggestively and forcefully brought about, through which you and your task and mission would be endangered by an all-encompassing Shaitan. Everything could also lead to worldwide human-triggered catastrophes. Nevertheless, it is not to be avoided, however, that you will be insulted by religionists, especially by blind, fanatical and imperious priests, pastors and theologians as well as know-it-alls, enviers, those blinded by sects and all kinds of other antagonists of lies, deception, charlatanism and swindle, as well as by attacks on your life. It will be attempted to silence you in the truest sense of the word, in order to do shaitan to your mission, to describe it as not trustworthy and to destroy it. However, it will also not be avoidable that state security services will keep you under surveillance and malicious ones will denounce you through lies and deception at authorities, secret services and the police, to which however you shall pay no attention, but simply conduct your important work and mission undeterred, which will also bring success. Edward, what you say and also have explained and taught to me the last years, I can and could understand well. To everything, I have also always given much thought, whereby many things also interest me mentally in this wise, what ultimately will result from everything. This is, for example, the case with the rapidly growing overpopulation, which you have already brought up several times and said thereto that also worldwide terrorism will arise therefrom and which only and simply comes about through many kinds of outcoming effects of the overpopulation. You have also told me, that as of 1951, I shall write down your explanations and spread them widely as warnings. However, I think that I still need to know a great deal more for that, such as what will the origin of everything be, which you say will arrive in the time to come. Also because of the further increasing overpopulation and everything that will result from it, I should know more. Sfath, you are right and really give thought to everything, which is why you also ask for the origin of the coming occurrences. The overpopulation, what terrible things will arise out of it in the time to come, about that I will still need to explain much to you. Now, however, I want to first explain what the beginning or simply the origin of many dignitiless things, factors and bad occurrences of the next coming 5.5 decades will be, which will also take place far into the 3rd millennium. Due to the guilt of the political, military, economic, scientific, world domination craving and felonious machinations of the USA, already next year there will occur worldwide many inhumane terrible things and much disaster will begin. and through the felonious doing of the USA, terrorism arises in many places, just as, however, also all kinds of natural disasters and catastrophes destroy the necessities of life of millions of human beings due to foodstuff corporations and as a result of the overexploitation of Earth's resources. For the most part, all the evil occurrences, such as these are wars, bloody uprisings, civil wars, insidious secret service operations, revolutions, government collapses, mass murders and destructions, are suggestively and forcefully brought about by the USA. And America will continue to bring a lot of terrible things, hardship and misery, as well as 1,000-fold death over the earth and the whole humankind, because therefrom a religious, delusion-related sectarianism will also spread over the world and demand thousands of death victims. From now on, reaching far into the future of the third millennium, new might-driven political, military and secret service machinations of America will lead to wars, revolutions and terrorism all around the world, because America again begins with a nuclear program and atomic bomb tests so that other states become animated to the same acts, which will then be continued in the coming times well into the third millennium, which will force very many human beings to flee and cause much radioactive contamination. From the new nuclear program of the USA will develop a worldwide global nuclear espionage, simply exactly that which arises as a result of this doing. Over time, as a result of espionage, the Soviet Union and China will also enter into the possession of documents for atomic bomb technology and will likewise carry out many tests, atomically contaminating many areas and bodies of water and attain possession of the bombs. The espionage, however, in order to attain possession of the plans and documents, etc. concerning atomic bomb technology, will also be practiced by various other countries. Therefore in the coming period and for some time before the beginning of the third millennium, in several countries other than the USA, China and the Soviet Union, which as of the 1990s will again be called Russia, nuclear bombs will be manufactured and large stocks of nuclear weapons built up. The technical development of nuclear technology, which is referred to as nuclear weapons technology, has been operating since 1940 and is based on something, about which I will further teach and inform you later on. Through the danger of a military weapons armament of the mightful states of the world spreads, and indeed especially in the USA and the Soviet Union, to which however, also China, England, France and Canada follow, as well as various other countries, even though they will not be as rich in world might as the USA and the Soviet Union. And since the Western states, such as particularly Europe and the USA in particular, have traditionally been hostile to the Russian Imperium, Russian Empire, Russian Tsardom, this will lead to an arms race between all states with ever more modern weapons. Especially atomic bombs, H-bombs, that is plutonium implosion bombs, etc. are created and tested, which generate tremendous amounts of energy for an explosion from nuclear reactions by nuclear fission or nuclear fusion, whereby in this respect a large variety of different variants will be brought forth through nuclear research. And in the time to come, as a deterrent and threat, many thousands of such bombs and other nuclear weapons will be created and stored by the world might states, especially by the USA and the Soviet Union, and in this wise a dangerous state will be called forth, which will stand until close to the third millennium under an evil sign of a threatening and worldwide and world-destroying nuclear war. And there will be many times in the 1970s and 1980s that nuclear wars threaten to break out due to misunderstandings. In one case it will be due to a false report of a Soviet spy satellite which will record solar reflections on clouds, which will then be erroneously assessed as a launch of a nuclear missile of the USA towards the USSR and, therefore, becomes an imminent danger of a Soviet nuclear strike. As a result of the nuclear arms race, more and more dangerous situations will appear already before and also afterwards, owing to misunderstandings of actions, because military false alarms have already been given since the beginning of the atomic age, which had already begun in 1940. And such false alarms will arise again and again because the concepts of defense of the American and Soviet military blocs and the missile early warning systems are subject to a large degree of faultiness and will constantly evoke nuclear war threats. Particularly great dangers will unfold over the coming decades, if by anxiety, low intelligence and irrationality of might-obsessed ones and their advisors, heightened tensions will be suggestively and forcefully brought about between the USA and the USSR, whereby however, as has been customary ever since, the dangerous aggression will come from the United States of America, while the Soviet Union will behave restrainedly, but distrustfully. This also will especially be the case then, if a feebly led policy of detente collapses in the late 1970s and 1980s, through which a new mutual distrust between the two world mights then comes about, which will be driven to a high and dangerous culmination and will lead to a further and irrational stockpiling of the nuclear arsenal, through which the entire Earth's surface and all life could be destroyed. And it will be that in many cases the world will just barely escape an atomic war, and it will alter nothing thereon, that in 1949 the so-called North Atlantic Pact is founded, which will be formed on the basis of the United Nations, in order to create a global system of collective security. The North Atlantic Treaty there owes its origin to the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, signed in San Francisco on June 26 of last year, which is considered the constitution of the community of states and with which a Western European alliance and thus a global system of collective security should be created. But nonetheless, no phase of a worldwide peace was created with the World War terminated at the end of last year, but a state of a Cold War, which will become a determining factor of future political, military and economic development and several times threaten to pervert into a nuclear war. As a result of the inability of the USA and the Soviet Union, which as great mights have been hostile to each other for a long time, and in fact as the only ones of all countries which played a part in the last World War, they pursue different military and political interests. Thereby as a rule, American demands on the USSR have been and are being made, which are only advantageous for the USA. Thus, both countries, as former allies in the World War triggered by Hitler and the Nazi regime, will continue to create conflicts between themselves that lead to differences between the US and the Soviet Union, whereby since the end of the World War, the hostilities and these differences become blatant and openly visible. And this hostility will not remain with the USA and the USSR, but will also reach far in the world into many other countries, giving rise to uprisings, wars, revolutions, unpeace and terrorism. It will also be the case that the military and state policy and intelligence agencies of the USA will often be interfering in foreign conflicts and problems, disingenuously provoking governmental overthrows and are to blame for a great many things. And since the political might of the USA continues to be prone to an absolute world domination, the American intelligence agencies and military might will also directly carry out actions, wars as well as disguised acts of terror and governmental infiltrations in foreign countries and occupyingly keep them under control. In all the countries where the military and politics as well as economics of the USA make themselves at home, all this will bring forth detrimental political, military and economic consequences, as well as many other terrible consequences. And everything will lead to uprisings, anarchism, to turmoil, civil wars, hatred of foreigners and racial hatred as well as to anarchistic, deadly and felonious political groups, who will become murdering, indulging ones in their delusion. However, there will also arise world-spanning terrorist organizations, whose fanatical founders will be trained by military personnel, and so forth, of the USA, who then gather like-minded ones around them and carry out bloody religio-political conflicts all over the world and ruthlessly and mercilessly bestially torture and murder countless innocent human beings and those who are of another religion. However, as I have already pointed out in previous explanations, in the coming times and well into the third millennium, upcoming Secret Service, military, criminal, warlike and even terroristic, subversive, felonious, Political and economic machinations by the USA in foreign countries will cause many state systems to break down and lead to civil wars and terrorist wars, resulting in great refugee flows and hasty migrations. Thus a very unpleasant and far-reaching terrorism will develop, as well as a Flüchtlingswesen, everything concerning the refugees, that can no longer be stopped up until the far future. Over time, this will result in extensive flows of refugees that spread out over the entire Earth, and in 70 years will be composed of around 70 million refugees, whereby in the second decade of the new, that is to say, third millennium, an irresponsible, naive sick woman might holder in Germany will contribute all the more to the fact that millions of refugees will stream to Europe from politically and economically underdeveloped as well as unsafe war-burdened countries which have fallen prey to terrorism. In the course of this, many will only be of the designation as per real and life-threatened refugees, because a large number of others flee from their homeland at that distant time only out of economic, criminal, felonious and for terroristic reasons, to profit in the countries of refuge as well as to act criminally and feloniously. But there will also be those who are ausgearet in a religious sect delusion, which pass themselves off as refugees in distress in order to get into the countries of refuge as terrorists, in which other religions and sects predominate, in order to spread death, terror and destruction there, especially among those innocent ones of another religion who are uninvolved in the war and terror. The majority of those governing and other responsible ones for the refugee immigrations, however, will be largely incapable of responding to the upcoming of the arising problems in a logical and rational wise, because they will make wrong and insufficient decisions and bring up and decide on measures that will be useless and let the terrible things continue. Thereby, it will come about that the problems and the difficulties with regard to the handling of the masses of refugees and what ought to be done concerning them on their behalf, will be pushed up all the more and the necessary solutions made more difficult. It thereby arises, then, that the way to unlawful actions and deeds, and thus also to murder, mass murder and destruction are paved for immigrated criminal, terroristic, and felonious elements. Thus, more and more extensive problems and Ausübungen will arise, which will ensue in Europe through criminality and felonious acts as a result of the refugee disaster and the diverse political, paramilitary, racist as well as religiously and sectarianly formed terrorism until the end of the second millennium and to the beginning of the third millennium and far beyond that. And it will be, that then only by means of rigorous measures can the refugee problems be solved, whereby however the necessary measures and steps thereto will not be undertaken by the governments and other responsible ones, and consequently neither right decisions nor precautions will be taken, nor right actions carried out. And this will be so, because they neither see the reality, nor are they able to assess everything correctly, consequently the problems are not solved, but still deepen and multiply. It is not seen by all those responsible what will result from everything, because with their intellect and rationality, they are not capable of doing so, which will lie in the fact that some of the rulers and others vilifying their responsibility, only think and act for themselves, and to them, everything else and thus also the prosperity or adversity of the human being will be of disinterest. This is why, it also will be, and especially in Europe that all security organizations of the countries affected by the Flüchtlingswesen, everything concerning the refugees, will be extremely dewy-eyed, neglectful and ignorant and will not recognize the real situation for a long time. So the cognition will escape them, that with the refugee flows, a large number of criminal and felonious elements as well as politically and religiously radicalized and sect-driven murder and destruction commission terrorists will be infiltrated into Europe and in all other countries of refuge, where they then over time in single, or group perpetrations spread death, terribleness, ruin and destruction. On the other hand, the other part will be so out of touch with everyday life and unrealistic, ignorant and naive as well as hypersensitive, weak, feeble, softened, fragile, squeamish, and so lowly intelligent and sickly in thoughts, feelings and with respect to the humaneness, that they will downplay everything and even more so do everything, that all the terribleness will continue to rise and, as a result, all problems will increase. And if the politicians and other responsible ones, who are often directed by the economy, are confronted with complex and important questions, then they will mostly give only short answers, because they are not able to think deep-reachingly, because their intellectual capacity corresponds, as a rule, to no high value and barely even requires a high level of intelligence. Regarding this, I have already explained some things to you several times in the last 2 years, to which has also to be explained now, however, that the rapidly growing overpopulation will also bring forth activities that will be related both to politics as also religions and sectarian terrorism and globally call forth malicious, murderous and destructive consequences. As a result of the relentlessly increasing overpopulation, more and more human beings who are religious and sectarian believers as well as osgiat et lustful for murder will very quickly appear, will fall prey to a completely osgiat et, blind, fanatical and blood, and death-demanding religious belief, and sectarianistic delusion. And regarding this, especially in Asia, Western Asia, as well as in Arabia and Africa, but also in other regions, large religion-related murderous and organized sects will form, acting out throughout the world, death spreading and spreading angst and torment. And this will be unavoidable and will come to pass, as the look into the future clearly shows, and the beginning signs for this already appear at the present time. The fanatical religious and sectarian belief represents a dangerous return of religions and sects in the coming decades and in the third millennium, through which deadly belief-related conflicts, torture, guilt, murder, wars, terrorism, suppression, physical and psychical guilt and destruction will be triggered. The truth shows regarding this, that the role of religions and sects is ambivalent and so ambiguous and doubtful and calls forth heavy conflicts, in which fanatical belief factors will play a major role in many malicious osutungen and effects. Among the believers of the various main religions and their almost innumerable sects, manifold acts of guilt and hatred have been ruling since ancient times, even though all religions and their sects preach love and peace, which however corresponds to nothing other than a phrase of obfuscation, such that every religion and sect, by means of their dogmas and their belief, can captivate and exploit all the believers of the world. Furthermore, it shall thereby be concealed from the believers, that truthfully the religions and sects are hostile to each other and that every single one of them wants to make the believers turn away from the other belief orientation. This is exactly what will disingenuously happen in the coming new times, even before the millennium change, through the planning and realization of interdenominational devotions, believers' meetings, prayer and discussion groups, church festivals and worship services and so forth. But also bloody and death-bringing religious and sect-driven machinations will increase, as will be the case in the coming month of August in the people-rich India, when bloody clashes are called forth in the city of Calcutta as a result of governmental disputes between Islamist and Hindu believers, which will demand more than 2,300 human lives. And this will go on until well into the third millennium, because, as always, the believers of one religion and its sects will be hostile to the other religions and sects, the Christians and Jews against the Muslims, and vice versa, the Buddhists against Hinduists, and vice versa, and all other religious and sect believers against the other religious and sect believers. Thus, in this regard, the future will be and will also bring in the 21st century, at many places in the world, torture and 100,000-fold guilt, murder, death, unpeace, physical and psychical guilt and destruction. And this will likewise come, through the hatred by large parts of the populations in those countries where streams of refugees immigrate and the refugees are of a different belief than the natives. The consequences of this will be hatred of foreigners, belief hatred, religious and sect hatred as well as racial hatred, which spreads out across entire countries and call forth pillaging, acts of guilt, murder and manslaughter, inhuman deeds and actions as well as great destructions. And in many countries, especially in Europe and the USA, formed foreigner and racial hatred groups, and even large foreigner hatred and racial hatred organizations will form and also spread their hate mentality into the respective national populations, just as everything will also be carried into other states and into other populations, where other groups and organizations of similar kinds will form, which will then band together transnationally with others. From the foreigner and racial hatred, a belief hatred and religious hatred will develop very quickly, a hatred against those who are of another religion, as well as against those who think differently, who will not affiliate themselves with the foreigner, and racial or religious hatred and will distance themselves from it. So it will happen that the hatred-obsessed ones and the ones who think differently and distance themselves from hatred, who also form groups and organizations and refuse to accept any radical machination with regard to hostility, feelinglessness for others, ruthlessness, unhumaneness and irreconcilability, etc. towards those who think differently and those of another religion, as well as refugees, will confront each other more and more hostilely and fight one another up until bloody conflicts. And ultimately, it will be inevitable that the governments and the security agencies of the countries will also get involved in these machinations, through which, out of everything, civil war-like conditions or even actual citizen uprisings can result. Many of those who indulge in foreigner, racial, and religious delusion, will fall prey to an uncontrollable might illusion, and in their hatred of foreigners and racism, to an obsession to be absolute master over life and death of the fellow human beings by means of anarchism, torture, guilt and murder. Following this, those who are obsessed thereof will gather large numbers of like-minded followers around them, who will take hold of weapons and all sorts of other deadly means in order to thus carry out worldwide assassinations and acts of terror and to massacre and murder human beings on a huge scale, and to destroy many things. The great mass of the overpopulation will bring with it that unavoidable unemployment and ever-increasing poverty will prevail, wherethrough innumerable human beings, occupationless and activityless, will take the day and the time as it comes, have no regulated future, nor will they see any, and grow weary of their hopeless condition. Through, it will come without doubt, that very many mostly young and younger human beings, in their hopelessness, will listen to criminal political seducers and sectarian hatred preachers and terrorists, as well as other felonious propagandists and will fall prey to them. Everything will happen in religious places, in families and through public institutions of various kinds and also with new, modern techniques, through which individual human beings or whole groups will be indoctrinated by agitator promoters, whose suggestive strong recruitment, and hate speech for guilt, war and terror bears fruit and will lead to murderous assassination attempts, suicide assassinations and other bestial murders as well as to immense destructions. Thus many women and men will go into wars and terror, and will spread unspeakably much affliction, misery, pain, terribleness, death, ruin and destruction. And the more extensive the overpopulation becomes, the more mainly young and younger human beings will see no chance for their future and will fall in bondage to the might-obsessed ones, sectarian fanatics and terrorist preachers who are irrationally screaming for sectarianism, assassinations, torture, war, murder, suicide, death, ruin, physical and psychical guilt and destruction and follow their inflammatory rhetoric and propaganda recruitment of lies. In this wise everything concerning this will run rampant ever further and more maliciously in the time to come and develop into murderous terrorist organizations, which on the one hand will be strongly politically might determined, on the other hand, however, will in particular be sectarianly interest-driven in the background. And in a sectarian way, several particularly large terrorist organizations will form, whose murderous and destructive performing of mischief will demand many thousands of human lives, particularly in various Islamic countries, as well as in the USA, in Asia and in Europe. As a result of a wrong interpretation and wrong understanding of their religion, these murderous sectarian organizations will spread death and ruin worldwide in many countries, without pity, without any mercy, humaneness, and leniency, and will even bring whole or large parts of countries under their rule and terrorize them. Also, however, many might-obsessed dictators, rulers and militaries of many countries will cause death and destruction, which in the time to come will result in many changes in the forms of government, which will be accompanied by bloody and murderous uprisings, revolutions and government overthrows. In doing acts of war, the USA will stand at the head of all states, who, as ever since, intervenes in a criminal and felonious form into concerns of foreign countries politically, militarily and secret service-wise around the world and strives for world control and world domination. But also supposedly close to the people, authorities and courts will act with blood, torture and death, as they judge over human beings and give them the death penalty, just as this, Forex, will also be the case tomorrow morning in Hamburg, Germany, where 11 human beings will be sentenced to death, because they have made themselves guilty as concentration camp guards. And these death sentences by allied military courts will follow still many others of the same kind in Germany, and indeed not only because of war felonies and murder, but also for many other felony reasons. Also in many other countries across the globe, human beings, supported and condemned by law, are delivered to death, because there is no humaneness and no fairness, but only dictatorial, blood-greedy legislation, through which the freedom and the peace of the human being are curtailed or even completely missing. And what the USA also does in this respect, including a lot of other things, does not reach to the public, nor the fact that since the end of the World War last year, they have also drawn benefit from Nazi felons and Nazi war felons, who are active in the Nazi Reich as scientists of various disciplines. Many of these felons are transported into the USA by the American military as experts for new weapons technologies of all kinds, and especially for the development of rockets, and are used there in the development of all kinds of secret weapons, and missile, as well as aircraft systems. Thus, these war felonious elements, of which by now more than 1,500 experts and scientists with a Nazi background, with others still to follow, who all must help, by means of their inventions and developments, the USA to the greatest might position in the world, were not and will not be brought to account, but will be placed in special positions, furnished with special rights, as well as state protection granted to them. Also irresponsible felonious acts upon the entire earthly humankind, the planet, the atmosphere, the climate, the land and the waters, as well as the nature and the fauna and flora by might-obsessed and irresponsible rulers, militaries and scientists, etc. will appear once again. The United States of America will stand at the forefront in this respect, in particular primarily concerning the development and use of nuclear weapons. Since 1938 and during the World War that was terminated last year, researchers and scientists of the Nazi Reich have tried to develop such weapon systems. But fortunately in this no usable nuclear weapon was achieved, otherwise the Earth and the humankind would have been thrown into a nuclear catastrophe. Nonetheless, through the guilt of the USA and those countries that are trying to emulate America, a catastrophe will spread out around the world, for which, however, a special explanation is necessary, which I will mention to you now, whereby a Nazi war felon named Kammler and his actions to be mentioned are of particular significance. Kammler is a conscienceless and very precise, logical, and extremely calculating thinker, a learned architect and engineer, and it was already clear to him at the beginning of the war in the early days of 1939, that the war could not be won and a victory against the world mights altogether was hopeless, because Hitler and those devoted to him had greatly underestimated the world mights USA and Soviet Union and those who had allied themselves with them, in terms of the entire weapon and armed forces potential. From the very beginning, Kammler had figured out everything and also knew that by a reckless participation in the Nazi regime he could take advantage of a great opportunity to be able to live out his might delusion, whereby he even held the thought in his mind, to go over to the enemy with important research material and so on, if the war situation would become dangerous for him. Consequently, he calculatingly adapted himself into everything. However, only for the sake of his exercising might, and for this reason, to work his way up to a mightful Nazi great, and thus to one of the most mightful men of the Nazi regime. So already from the start, he was in this kind a traitor to Hitler and the Third Reich, because, according to his sense, he did not work for these, but only for himself and his might behavior. Kammler, however, was heavily personality disturbed, which, however, he was able to slickly gloss over and conceal from other human beings through his acting. Thus it was possible for him to quickly become SS Obergruppenführer and General of the Waffen-SS of the Nazi dictatorship, and as a might-obsessed, and moreover cold-blooded mass murderer, conscienceless Jew-hater and racist beyond compare, as well as hate-obsessed one against human beings in general, to rise up to be one of the most important Nazi greats. He was also responsible for the jet aircraft program, as well as for the very numerous underground armament factories, the production of the V-1 winged bombs and V-2 ballistic missiles. But when the end of the war came, for the sake of his personal safety, he pushed all his exercised might off himself, and, with the help of two confidants who were working on the nuclear weapons research program, took possession of secret and important research records and plans. These were pertinent to a nuclear fission project and uranium project, which following the 1938 discovery of nuclear fission in Germany, was carried out to the end of the World War, as Hitler had ordered it. He personally issued the order to technically use nuclear fission and to develop to a widely devastating and all-destructive nuclear weapon. The highly secret researches in this field were therefore very far advanced and were about 15 years ahead of the same kind of researches and developments of the USA. Consequently, the scientists also met with some successes, which, however, did not bring any success in this respect that they were able to make a functioning atomic bomb or other nuclear weapons. Actual nuclear weapons tests were thus denied to the Nazi dictatorship, which is why only two small explosion trials could be carried out, which, however, were to be assessed with only minimal success and were therefore of no great significance. They also failed to produce a nuclear chain reaction in a reactor, because in spite of extensive construction efforts, they failed to realize corresponding reactors. Nonetheless, the research was very far advanced, whose valuable records and plans Kammler got in possession of with the help of his two confidants, together with almost 68 kilograms of weapons-grade uranium. Provided with all the necessary documentation and the uranium, he succeeded in delivering himself up to the U.S. Secret Services and handing everything over to them, in the hope of being welcomed, protected and not placed before a war tribunal. In fact, contrary to his high degree of intelligence and his shrewd cleverness, he was naive in this regard and thought that he, being a bringer of secret research papers, the results, plans, and the uranium, would be esteemed as a valuable defector, brought to the USA and protected by the Americans. But they knew that he was one of the worst Nazi war felons, who were accused of mass murders. As a result, he was arrested when he delivered himself up to the secret services. All his stolen secret records and plans and the uranium were taken away and he was incarcerated in the USA as a prisoner. The Americans knew about the nuclear fission research of the Nazi Reich and likewise wanted, ahead of the Soviet Union, to get hold of the cognitions won regarding this, just as they also wanted to altogether secure the knowledge around the German armament knowledge and the developmental edge in the jet aircraft and rocket technology, whose advanced technologies they were quite shocked about. So they hunted for plans, records, scientists and researchers as well as parts of whole products, in order to secure the Nazi know-how before everything could fall into the hands of the Soviet Union. To this end, they also needed Kammler, who was extremely welcome to them with his knowledge and his records and plans as well as the uranium, however, not according to his sense, because after his arrest in the month of May last year, he was taken to the USA as a prisoner and has been held since then in a maximum security unit, where he has since been repeatedly interrogated for hours at a time, which however, will ultimately be too much for him, and in the course of the next year, he will end his life through suicide, as I have seen in a foresight. Nevertheless, the fact that the USA has made great use out of the research records, results, cognitions and plans and the weapons-grade uranium received from Kamla for its own research and plans, etc. This is absolutely and indisputably for sure. Only by the use of the more advanced knowledge acquired of the Nazis' nuclear fission research leaked to them by Kamla, could the USA, under the name Trinity test, that is Trinity, first carry out atomic bomb tests, which took place on July 16 last year at the site of the White Sands missile range near the town of Alamogordo, New Mexico, and then build the 2 atomic bombs which were dropped on Hiroshima as well as Nagasaki. And these irresponsible and felonious monstrosities upon the entire humankind, the planet, the atmosphere, nature, fauna and flora, on all land and all waters as well onto the climate, still finds continuation this year, because the felonious nuclear tests will continue. So there will also be no rest with the dropping of atomic bombs on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima on August 6 and Nagasaki on August 9 and their destruction last year, which has demanded several 100,000 human lives and countless wounded and atomically contaminated human beings. To be continued. Will post as more as completed. Translation: Bruce La, USA. Marianne Elena, Switzerland.